My wife told me she was pregnant at exactly 7:43 p.m. on a Tuesday, right after I'd finished my second beer and was contemplating whether the leftover pizza qualified as dinner or just wishful thinking. She stood in our kitchen doorway, backlit by the fluorescent light that had been flickering for 3 months, holding a plastic stick like it was the Olympic torch. "Alex, we're finally having our third child," Natalie said, her voice trembling with what I assumed was joy. "The one we always dreamed about," I smiled. I even managed to make it look genuine, which surprised me because inside, I was already carving her name into the mental list of people who think I'm an idiot. The problem with Natalie's announcement wasn't the timing or the setting, or even the fact that she'd interrupted my Tuesday night ritual of pretending our marriage still worked. The problem was simple mathematics. I'm a civil engineer. I spend my days calculating load-bearing capacities, stress points, and structural integrity. I know when something doesn't add up. Natalie and I hadn't shared the same bed in 2 years, let alone anything more intimate than arguing about whose turn it was to take out the garbage. "That's wonderful, honey," I said, setting down my beer and walking over to embrace her. She felt stiff in my arms, like she was hugging a stranger, which I suppose she was. "I know we've been going through a rough patch," she continued, pulling back to look at me with those green eyes that used to make my heart race and now just made me tired. "But this changes everything. This is our chance to start over." I nodded, playing the part of the excited husband-to-be. "Have you been to the doctor yet?" "I have an appointment next week, but the test is pretty clear." She held up the plastic stick again, and I could see the 2 pink lines that supposedly indicated our impending bundle of joy. "That's great, Nat. Really great." I kissed her forehead, tasting the expensive perfume she'd started wearing 6 months ago. The same perfume that lingered in our hallway sometimes when I came home from work, even though she claimed to be running errands. That night, I lay in the guest bedroom where I'd been sleeping since our last major fight about her girls' nights out that seemed to happen 3 times a week. I stared at the ceiling and did what I do best. I calculated. 2 years without intimacy. A wife who'd become increasingly distant and secretive. Credit card statements showing purchases at restaurants I'd never been to, hotels I'd never seen, and a jewelry store that definitely hadn't been shopping for me. And now, miraculously, a pregnancy that defied basic biology. I'm not a detective, but I'm not stupid either. The next morning, Natalie was already gone when I woke up. She'd left a note on the kitchen counter. "Early meeting. Love you. We need to start planning." With a little heart drawn next to her signature. The heart looked forced, like she'd had to remember to add it. I called my office and told them I'd be in late, then spent an hour going through our home office. Natalie had always been organized to the point of obsession, but lately she'd become secretive about her paperwork. The filing cabinet was locked, which was new. Her laptop required a password, which was also new. But Natalie had one weakness. She trusted me to be as oblivious as she thought I was. I found her spare key to the filing cabinet taped under her desk drawer, right where she'd always kept it. Inside, among the usual bills and insurance documents, I discovered a folder labeled Personal that definitely hadn't been there before. The folder contained printouts of text messages, hotel receipts, and a business card for someone named Eric Dalton, VP of Marketing at Natalie's biotech company. There was also a handwritten note in Natalie's careful script. "E says he's ready to leave Jennifer. Just need to handle a situation first." A situation. That would be me. I photographed everything with my phone, returned the documents to their exact positions, and locked the filing cabinet. Then I sat in my kitchen, drinking coffee that tasted like ashes, and planned my next move. I've always believed that when someone shows you who they really are, you should believe them. Natalie was showing me that she thought I was stupid enough to believe her pregnancy story, naive enough to accept her lies, and weak enough to let her walk all over me while she planned her exit strategy. She was wrong on all 3 counts. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. By the time she came home that evening, I'd already started making my own plans. I greeted her with a smile and asked about her day, listened to her fabricated stories about meetings and deadlines, and nodded sympathetically when she complained about morning sickness that had conveniently started just hours after her announcement. "I think we should start looking at cribs this weekend," she said over dinner, pushing food around her plate like a woman who was genuinely nauseous. "And maybe we should consider moving to a bigger house. This place is getting cramped." "Whatever you think is best," I replied, cutting my steak with surgical precision. "I want you and the baby to be comfortable." She smiled at me then, and for a moment I saw a flash of the woman I'd married 8 years ago, The woman who used to laugh at my jokes and steal my hoodies and make me believe that happily ever after was actually possible. Then the moment passed, and I saw her for what she'd become, a stranger wearing my wife's face, planning my destruction while pretending to carry my child. That night, after she'd gone to bed, I made a phone call to my lawyer about transferring the house deed into my name alone. It was perfectly legal. We'd bought the house before we were married, and I'd been making the mortgage payments from my account for the past 3 years, while Natalie's salary went to her personal expenses. I also ordered a set of small, wireless cameras online, not for evidence that would hold up in court, but for my own education. I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with before I decided how to handle it. The cameras arrived 2 days later, and I spent my lunch break installing them in strategic locations around our house. Nothing invasive or illegal, just devices that would help me document the truth about my marriage. Within a week, I had my answer. The footage was worse than I'd expected, and I'd expected it to be pretty awful. Natalie wasn't just cheating on me, she was hosting strategy sessions. Every Tuesday and Thursday, while I was at work, she'd invite her friend Khloe Mason over for what they called planning meetings. Khloe worked in HR at the same biotech company where Natalie was a project manager, and apparently they'd been coordinating Natalie's affair with Eric Dalton like it was a corporate merger. I watched hours of recorded conversations from my hidden cameras, taking notes like I was preparing for the most important presentation of my career, which, in a way, I was. Eric says Jennifer is getting suspicious, Khloe said during one particularly enlightening session. She was perched on my couch, drinking wine from my glasses, discussing the destruction of my marriage like it was office gossip. She found some receipts from that hotel in Portland. He needs to be more careful, Natalie replied, pacing around our living room in a dress I'd never seen before. We can't afford to have this blow up before I'm ready. What about Alex? You really think he'll buy the pregnancy thing? Natalie laughed, and the sound made my stomach clench. Alex believes whatever I tell him. He's so wrapped up in his engineering projects and his little hobbies that he barely notices I exist. This whole thing will be easy. And the timeline works out? Perfectly. I'll let him play happy father-to-be for a few months, then have a convenient miscarriage right around the time Eric finalizes his separation. By then, I'll have everything in place for the transition. The transition. She was talking about leaving me like it was a business reorganization. I paused the recording and walked to my kitchen, where I opened a beer with hands that shook slightly. Not from fear or sadness, but from pure, concentrated anger. The kind of anger that burns clean and focused, like a welding torch. Natalie thought I was oblivious. She thought I was weak. She thought she could manipulate me into playing the role of the supportive husband while she orchestrated my humiliation and abandonment. She was about to learn how wrong she was. I spent the next 3 days researching Eric Dalton. Social media made it easy. He was exactly what I'd expected. A 40-something marketing executive who drove a BMW, wore expensive suits, and posted photos of himself at trendy restaurants and exclusive events. He was married to Jennifer Dalton, a pediatric nurse who seemed genuinely nice in her photos with their 2 young children. Eric's weakness was obvious from his online presence. He was vain, careless, and addicted to social media attention. He posted his location constantly, shared details about his work projects, and had apparently never heard of privacy settings. More importantly, he had no idea that I existed or that I was paying attention. I also researched Khloe Mason, Natalie's partner in crime. She was single, ambitious, and had a reputation around town for being involved in other people's business. She'd been through 2 messy relationships in the past 5 years, both of which had ended with her former partners complaining about her manipulative behavior. Perfect. I was dealing with amateurs who thought they were playing chess when they were actually playing checkers. On Friday evening, Natalie announced that she had plans with Khloe for the weekend. Girls' night, she said, using the same tone she might use to discuss a dental appointment. We're going to that new wine bar downtown. Sounds fun, I replied, not looking up from the engineering journal I was pretending to read. I'll probably just stay in, work on some projects. You don't mind? Of course not. You should enjoy yourself while you still can. Once the baby comes, everything will change. She kissed the top of my head, a gesture that felt more like a pat you'd give a loyal dog. You're going to be such a great father, Alex. After she left, I changed into dark clothes and drove downtown. The wine bar was exactly the kind of trendy place that Natalie had started frequenting. Exposed brick walls, craft cocktails with names like Midnight in Morocco, and prices that would make a reasonable person weep. I parked across the street and waited. At 8:47 p.m., Natalie and Khloe arrived. At 9:15 p.m., Eric Dalton joined them. I watched through the window as they sat at a corner table, leaning close together like conspirators. which of course they were. I took photos with my phone's zoom lens, not for any legal purpose, but because I wanted to document this moment. The moment when my cheating wife and her accomplices thought they were safe, thought they were clever, thought they were in control. They stayed until nearly midnight, and I followed Eric when he left. He drove straight to the Riverside Motel, a place that advertised hourly rates and asked no questions. Natalie's car was already in the parking lot. I didn't need to see any more. I drove home, uploaded the photos to a secure cloud account, and went to bed in the guest room where I'd been sleeping for 2 years. The next morning, Natalie came home at 7 a.m., claiming she'd spent the night at Khloe's apartment after drinking too much wine. "How was your evening?" I asked, handing her a cup of coffee. "Oh, you know how it is with Khloe. We talked for hours about everything and nothing. I probably shouldn't have stayed so late, but it felt good to just relax and be myself." "I'm glad you had fun," I said, watching her face carefully. She was a better liar than I'd given her credit for, but not nearly as good as she thought she was. That afternoon, while Natalie was supposedly napping off her hangover, I made 2 important phone calls. The first was to Dave Russo, a private investigator who'd been recommended by my lawyer. Dave was a former police detective who specialized in what he called domestic complications. His voice was gravelly from too many cigarettes, and he had the kind of cynical humor that suggested he'd seen everything at least twice. "You want me to follow your wife?" he asked after I'd explained the situation. "I want you to document everything. Where she goes, who she sees, what she does. I need a complete picture." "Most guys in your situation want me to find evidence for divorce court. You sound like you've got something else in mind." "Let's just say I believe in being thorough." "Fair enough. My rate is $200 a day plus expenses. I'll need a week up front." "Done." The second call was to my coworker, Mike Patterson, who happened to be one of the best computer programmers I'd ever met. Mike was the kind of guy who could hack into anything given enough time and motivation, though he was careful to keep his more creative activities on the legal side of the line. "I need a favor," I told him. "What kind of favor?" "The kind that requires your particular skill set and absolute discretion." Mike was quiet for a moment. "This about Natalie?" "What makes you ask that?" "You've been different lately, focused in a way that makes me think you're working on a project that's not related to bridge construction." I'd always liked Mike. He was observant, loyal, and had no patience for people who thought they could manipulate others without consequences. "I need to send some emails that appear to come from someone else's account. Nothing illegal, nothing that will cause real damage, just some misdirection." "How much misdirection are we talking about?" "Enough to level the playing field," Mike laughed. "I'll be right over." By Sunday evening, I had a private investigator documenting my wife's activities and a computer expert helping me prepare what I privately thought of as Phase 1 of my response to Natalie's pregnancy announcement. Natalie spent Sunday evening planning nursery decorations and researching prenatal vitamins, playing her role with the dedication of a method actor. She even bought a book about pregnancy nutrition and left it conspicuously on the kitchen counter. "I want to do everything right this time," she said, rubbing her still flat stomach with maternal concern that would have been touching if it weren't completely fabricated. "I know you will," I replied, and meant it. She would do everything right, for Eric Dalton's benefit, not mine. That night, I lay in the guest bedroom and finalized my plans. Natalie thought she was playing a long game, manipulating me while she arranged her transition to a new life with her lover. She thought she had months to execute her strategy while I remained oblivious and cooperative. She was wrong about the timeline, and she was especially wrong about my willingness to cooperate. Phase 1 would begin on Monday morning. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that makes you believe in new beginnings. Natalie certainly seemed to believe in them as she got ready for work, humming softly while she applied makeup that was more elaborate than her usual routine. "Big day today?" I asked, adjusting my tie in the mirror. "Just the usual meetings, though I should probably tell my boss about the pregnancy soon. I want to make sure they know I'm committed to finishing my current projects before I need to take time off." "That's very professional of you." She smiled at me in the mirror, and I smiled back. We looked like a normal couple preparing for a normal day. The illusion was almost perfect. After Natalie left for work, I called in sick to my own job and drove to Dave Russo's office. It was located above a pawn shop in a part of town that had seen better decades, with a waiting room that smelled like coffee and disappointment. Dave himself looked exactly like I'd expected. A man in his 50s with gray hair, tired eyes, and the kind of face that had seen enough human nature to find very little of it surprising. "You look like a man with a plan," he said, gesturing for me to sit in a chair that had probably been old when Nixon was president. "I prefer to think of it as a structured approach to problem solving." "Uh-huh. And what kind of problems are we solving?" I handed him a folder containing everything I'd discovered about Natalie's affair. The documents from her filing cabinet, screenshots of Eric's social media posts, photos from the wine bar, and a detailed timeline of her suspicious activities. Dave whistled softly as he reviewed the materials. Your wife's not exactly a master criminal, is she? No, but she thinks she is. That's what I want to use against her. What exactly do you want me to do? I want you to follow Eric Dalton, document his routine, his habits, his weaknesses. I want to know everything about him that his own wife doesn't know. And your wife? Leave her to me. I have a different approach in mind for Natalie. Dave leaned back in his chair, studying me with the expression of a man trying to decide whether his client was dangerous or just determined. You seem awfully calm for a guy whose wife is planning to leave him. I'm an engineer. I don't get emotional about structural failures. I fix them. And if I find something you don't want to know? There's nothing I don't want to know. The truth is always better than uncertainty. Dave nodded slowly. All right, I'll start today. But I want you to understand something. Once we open this door, there's no closing it. You sure you're ready for whatever we might find? I've been ready since Tuesday night. I left Dave's office and drove to my real destination, Natalie's workplace. The biotech company where she worked was housed in a modern glass building that looked like it had been designed by someone who thought the future would be very clean and very boring. I parked across the street and called Mike Patterson. You ready for this? I asked. Born ready. You sure about the timing? Positive. Natalie has a staff meeting at 10:30. That gives us a 2-hour window. And you're sure this won't cause any real problems for her? Nothing she can't handle with a simple explanation, assuming she's willing to tell the truth, which she won't be. Mike laughed. I like the way you think. Okay, initiating phase 1 in 3, 2, 1. What Mike did next was technically legal, ethically questionable, and absolutely brilliant. Using his considerable computer skills, he sent an email to Natalie's work account that appeared to come from her boss, Mrs. Quinn, congratulating her on a promotion that didn't exist to a position that had never been posted. The email was perfectly crafted. Professional tone, correct company formatting, and just enough detail to seem legitimate while being vague enough to create confusion. It also included a request for Natalie to announce the good news to the team during today's staff meeting. I waited across the street, watching the building's windows and imagining the chaos that was probably unfolding inside. At 12:15 p.m., my phone rang. It was Natalie, and she sounded breathless with excitement. Alex, you'll never believe what happened. What's wrong? You sound upset. Not upset, excited. I got promoted. Mrs. Quinn sent me an email this morning about a new position, senior project coordinator with a 15% salary increase. That's wonderful, honey. Congratulations. I'm supposed to announce it at the staff meeting this afternoon. I can't believe they kept it so quiet. I had no idea I was even being considered. You deserve it. You've been working so hard lately. I have to call Khloe and my mother. And, oh, Alex, this changes everything. With the baby coming and now this promotion, we're going to be fine. Better than fine. After she hung up, I sat in my car and waited. Phase 1 was designed to accomplish 2 things. First, to demonstrate that Natalie was willing to believe and act on information without verification when it suited her desires. Second, to create a situation where her dishonesty would be publicly exposed. At 2:47 p.m., my phone rang again. This time, Natalie sounded like she'd been crying. Alex, something terrible happened. What's wrong? The promotion. There was some kind of mistake. Mrs. Quinn says she never sent that email. She says there is no senior project coordinator position. I announced it to the entire staff, and now everyone thinks I'm either lying or delusional. That doesn't make sense. You showed me the email. I know, but when I tried to forward it to Mrs. Quinn, it was gone. Completely gone from my account. The IT department says there's no record of it ever existing. I made appropriate sympathetic noises while privately admiring Mike's thoroughness. He'd programmed the email to delete itself after 6 hours, leaving no trace of its existence. Maybe it was some kind of system glitch, I suggested. Maybe, but Mrs. Quinn looked at me like I was completely crazy. And Khloe? Khloe acted like she didn't know what to say. I'm sure it will all get sorted out. I hope so. But Alex, what if this affects my job? What if they think I'm unstable? With the baby coming, I can't afford to have problems at work. Everything will be fine, I assured her. You're smart and capable. One confusing day doesn't change that. But of course, everything wasn't going to be fine. This was just the beginning. That evening, Natalie came home looking defeated and embarrassed. She'd spent the afternoon trying to convince her colleagues that she wasn't lying about the promotion email, but without evidence, she just looked foolish. The worst part is that everyone was congratulating me, she said, slumping on the couch. I felt so proud, so validated, and then it all just disappeared. Maybe someone's playing a prank? Who would do something like that? I shrugged, pouring her a glass of the herbal tea she'd been drinking instead of wine since her pregnancy announcement. Office politics can get pretty nasty. Maybe someone doesn't like the idea of you getting promoted. But who would have access to Mrs. Quinn's email account? I don't know, honey, but I'm sure the IT department will figure it out. Of course, the IT department would find nothing because Mike had covered his tracks perfectly. But Natalie's reputation at work had taken a hit, and more importantly, she demonstrated exactly the kind of behavior I was counting on. She was willing to act on information that confirmed her desires without proper verification. That night, she went to bed early, claiming the stress had triggered her morning sickness. I stayed up late, reviewing the photos Dave had already sent me of Eric Dalton's daily routine. Eric was a creature of habit. Coffee at the same cafe every morning, lunch at the same restaurant twice a week, drinks at the same bar every Friday. He was also careless with his personal information, leaving his car unlocked and his phone unattended. Most importantly, he was arrogant. His social media posts showed a man who believed he was smarter and more sophisticated than everyone around him. He thought he was conducting a clever affair with a married woman, but he was actually walking into a trap that he couldn't even see being constructed around him. Phase 2 would target Eric directly, and unlike the email prank, Phase 2 would have consequences that couldn't be easily explained away. I fell asleep that night planning exactly how to make Eric Dalton's life as complicated as he'd made mine. Dave Russo called me at 6:30 a.m. on Wednesday with the kind of news that makes a man's day before he's even had his first cup of coffee. Your boy Eric has some interesting habits, Dave said without preamble. You got time to meet this morning? I'll be there in an hour. I told Natalie I had an early site inspection and left her making herself toast that she'd probably throw away after 2 bites, part of her ongoing performance as an expectant mother struggling with morning sickness. Dave's office looked even more depressing in the early morning light, but his coffee was strong and his information was golden. Eric Dalton is what we in the business call a high-maintenance cheater, Dave began, spreading photographs across his desk like he was dealing cards. He's got expensive tastes, a short attention span, and a serious problem with impulse control. The photos showed Eric at various locations around town. The upscale gym where he worked out every morning, the Italian restaurant where he took Natalie for lunch, the electronics store where he'd apparently bought her an expensive tablet, and most interestingly, the parking lot behind his office building where he'd been meeting with a woman who definitely wasn't Natalie. Who's the other woman? I asked. Amanda Chen, marketing coordinator at a competing firm. Looks like Eric's been hedging his bets. Your wife isn't his only extracurricular activity. I studied the photos of Eric with this Amanda woman. They showed the same intimate body language, the same secretive meeting style, the same expensive gifts. How long has this been going on? Based on what I've observed and some discreet inquiries, I'd say about 3 months, right around the time his thing with your wife started getting serious. I leaned back in my chair, processing this information. Eric wasn't just cheating on his wife with Natalie. He was cheating on Natalie with Amanda. It was almost impressive in its audacity. There's more, Dave continued. Eric's got some financial problems. He's been using company credit cards for personal expenses, including those fancy dinners with your wife. His boss hasn't noticed yet, but it's the kind of thing that tends to catch up with people. How do you know about the credit cards? Dave smiled. I have friends in various industries. Let's just say Eric's not as careful with his paperwork as he should be. I studied the photos again, seeing new possibilities in every image. Eric thought he was playing multiple women while maintaining his professional reputation and his marriage. In reality, he was juggling dynamite while standing in a fireworks factory. What do you need from me? I asked. Just keep doing whatever you're doing with your wife. Eric's the weak link in this whole operation. If we apply pressure in the right places, he'll probably collapse the entire thing himself. I left Dave's office with a folder full of ammunition and drove to my actual job, where I spent the day designing load calculations for a bridge project while mentally designing something much more personal. That evening, Natalie seemed more relaxed than she'd been since the email incident. She'd apparently convinced herself that the promotion confusion had been a technical glitch, and her colleagues had moved on to other gossip. Khloe thinks I should file a complaint with IT, she said over dinner. She says someone might have hacked into the system. That seems like a reasonable explanation, I agreed. Have you talked to Mrs. Quinn about it again? Briefly. She was professional about it, but I could tell she thinks I'm either lying or incompetent. It's going to take time to rebuild that relationship. I'm sure you'll figure it out. You're good at managing difficult situations. Natalie smiled at me, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. She had no idea that her difficult situation was about to become much more complicated. After dinner, while Natalie was taking what she called a prenatal bath with expensive oils that were supposed to be good for the baby she wasn't carrying, I called Mike Patterson. "Ready for phase 2? I asked. "What did you have in mind?" "I need you to do some research on a company credit card policy. Specifically, I need to know the best way to anonymously report suspicious expenses to a corporate compliance department." Going after the boyfriend's finances. I like it. Give me the details. I provided Mike with Eric's company information and the evidence Dave had gathered about his expense account irregularities. Within an hour, Mike had identified the appropriate corporate whistleblower hotline and helped me craft an anonymous report that detailed Eric's personal use of company funds. The report was factual, well-documented, and completely untraceable to me. It would trigger an internal investigation that Eric would have no way to explain or avoid. "This is going to cause some serious problems for him," Mike warned. "That's the point." "And you're sure you want to go down this road? Once his company starts investigating, there's no controlling what they might find." "I'm counting on it." I submitted the report that night and went to bed feeling more relaxed than I had in weeks. Eric Dalton was about to discover that actions have consequences and that cheating on multiple women while stealing from your employer is not a sustainable lifestyle choice. The next morning, Natalie left for work in a good mood, humming the same tune she'd been humming since her pregnancy announcement. She kissed me goodbye with what seemed like genuine affection, though I suspected it had more to do with her plans with Eric than any feelings for me. I waited until 9 a.m., then called Eric's office. "Eric Dalton, please," I said when the receptionist answered. "I'm sorry, Mr. Dalton is in meetings all morning. Can I take a message?" "No message. I'll try again later." I didn't need to speak to Eric. I just wanted to confirm he was at work when his world started falling apart. Dave had told me that corporate investigations usually began with a surprise meeting with HR and the compliance department, followed by an immediate suspension pending a full audit. At 10:47 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Dave. "Package delivered. Target is having a very bad day." At 11:23 a.m., Natalie called me, sounding confused and worried. "Alex, something strange is happening at work." "What kind of strange?" "Eric got called into a meeting with HR this morning, and he hasn't come back. Khloe heard from someone in accounting that there might be some kind of investigation." "Investigation into what?" "Nobody knows. But Eric looked really upset when they called him in, and now there are rumors that he's been suspended." I made appropriate concerned noises while privately celebrating the efficiency of corporate bureaucracy when properly motivated. "I'm sure it's nothing serious," I said. "These things usually turn out to be misunderstandings." "I hope so. Eric's a good guy, and he's been under a lot of stress lately with his marriage problems." Marriage problems. That was one way to describe a man who was cheating on his wife with at least 2 different women while embezzling from his employer. "Maybe you should stay out of office politics," I suggested, "especially with the baby coming. You don't want to get caught up in other people's drama." "You're right. I just feel bad for him." I'm sure she did, but her sympathy for Eric was about to be tested in ways she couldn't imagine. That afternoon, Dave called with an update. Eric's been suspended pending a full investigation into his expense accounts. They've also frozen his corporate credit cards and restricted his access to company systems. "How's he handling it?" "Not well. He spent his lunch break at Murphy's bar, drinking whiskey and making phone calls. From what I could overhear, he's trying to figure out who reported him." "Any idea how long the investigation will take?" "Corporate investigations are thorough. I'd guess at least 2 weeks, maybe more if they find additional irregularities. And based on what I've seen of Eric's spending habits, they're going to find plenty." That evening, Natalie came home looking worried and distracted. She picked at her dinner and kept checking her phone, presumably waiting for updates about Eric's situation. "How was your day?" I asked. "Confusing. The whole office is buzzing about Eric's suspension. Nobody knows what's really going on, but the rumors are getting worse." "What kind of rumors?" "Financial irregularities, misuse of company resources, possible termination. If even half of it is true, Eric's career is finished." I nodded sympathetically while thinking that Eric's career was the least of his problems. A man who was cheating on his wife with multiple women while stealing from his employer was facing consequences that went far beyond unemployment. "I'm sure he'll figure it out," I said. "People like Eric always seem to land on their feet." But Eric wasn't going to land on his feet this time. He was going to land exactly where I wanted him. Desperate, exposed, and completely unprepared for what was coming next. Phase 3 would target the weakest link in the conspiracy, Khloe Mason, Natalie's accomplice and enabler, and Phase 3 was going to be much more personal. Khloe Mason made her first mistake on Friday afternoon when she decided to comfort my wife with what she probably thought was harmless gossip. Her second mistake was doing it in my living room, where my carefully placed cameras captured every word. I watched the footage that evening while Natalie was upstairs, supposedly researching baby names, but actually texting someone. Probably Eric, though he was likely too busy dealing with his corporate investigation to provide much emotional support. "This whole thing with Eric is so unfair," Khloe said on the recording, curled up on my couch with a glass of wine that she'd helped herself to from my kitchen. "Someone obviously has it out for him." "But who would do something like that?" Natalie asked, pacing around the living room with the nervous energy of a woman whose carefully laid plans were starting to unravel. "Could be anyone. Corporate politics are vicious, especially in marketing. Maybe someone wanted his position, or maybe his wife found out about..." Khloe trailed off, realizing she'd almost said too much. "About what?" "Nothing. I just meant maybe Jennifer got suspicious and decided to cause problems for him at work." Natalie stopped pacing. "You think Jennifer knows?" "I don't know, but wives have intuition about these things. Look at you. You always seem to know exactly what Alex is thinking." If only that were true. But Khloe's comment gave me an idea for Phase 3 that was both elegant and poetic. The next morning, I drove to Khloe's apartment complex, a trendy development that catered to young professionals who wanted to live downtown but couldn't afford actual downtown prices. I'd been there once before, for a housewarming party that Natalie had insisted we attend. I wasn't there to confront Khloe or break into her apartment or do anything that would leave evidence of my involvement. I was there to observe and plan, the same way I'd observe a construction site before designing a foundation. Khloe's weakness was obvious from her social media presence and her behavior at social gatherings. She was desperate for attention and validation. She inserted herself into other people's drama because it made her feel important and connected. She was the kind of person who thrived on secrets and gossip because they gave her power over others. That weakness was about to become a liability. I spent the weekend researching Khloe's background, her job responsibilities, and her personal relationships. What I discovered was a pattern of behavior that stretched back years. She had a history of getting involved in office romances, workplace conflicts, and personal dramas that had nothing to do with her. More importantly, she had a history of documenting these involvements. Her social media accounts were full of cryptic posts about supporting friends through difficult times and keeping secrets for people I care about. She thought she was being discreet, but she was actually creating a digital trail of her meddling. On Monday morning, I implemented Phase 3 with a single phone call to the HR department at Natalie's company. "I'd like to report a potential conflict of interest," I told the HR representative, using a voice disguise app that Mike had recommended. "What kind of conflict of interest?" "An HR employee who's been providing confidential information to help facilitate an extramarital affair between two other employees." "That's a serious accusation. Do you have evidence?" "Check Khloe Mason's communications and social media activity over the past 6 months. Cross-reference it with the recent investigation into Eric Dalton. I think you'll find some interesting connections." I hung up before they could ask more questions. Anonymous tips were designed to trigger investigations, not provide complete evidence packages. HR departments were trained to follow up on credible accusations, and what I'd given them was definitely credible. The beauty of targeting Khloe was that she'd actually done everything I was accusing her of. She had provided confidential information to Natalie about Eric's employment status. She had used her position in HR to help facilitate their affair by providing inside information about company policies and procedures. She had documented her involvement through her social media posts and text messages. All I'd done was point the spotlight in her direction. By Wednesday, the investigation had begun. Dave reported that Khloe had been called in for a meeting with the senior HR director and the company's legal counsel. By Thursday, she was suspended pending a full review of her communications and her handling of confidential employee information. By Friday, Natalie was in full panic mode. "They suspended Khloe," she told me over dinner, her voice tight with stress. "They're saying she violated confidentiality policies and professional conduct standards." "That sounds serious." "It is serious. If they fire her, she'll never work in HR again. And Alex, I'm worried that this whole thing might be connected to Eric's investigation." "How could they be connected?" "I don't know, but the timing is suspicious. First, Eric gets suspended for financial irregularities. Now Khloe is being investigated for policy violations. It feels like someone is targeting people at our company." She was closer to the truth than she realized, but her paranoia was working in my favor. Instead of seeing a pattern of consequences for unethical behavior, she was seeing a conspiracy against her social circle. "Maybe you should be careful," I suggested. "If there really is some kind of investigation going on, you don't want to get caught up in it." but I haven't done anything wrong. Of course not. But sometimes these corporate investigations expand beyond their original scope. Innocent people can get hurt if they're associated with the wrong situations. That night, Natalie made several long phone calls from our bedroom, speaking in whispers that my cameras couldn't quite capture. She was probably trying to coordinate with Eric and Khloe, but with both of them dealing with their own crises, she was essentially on her own for the first time since her affair had begun. The next morning, she announced that she wasn't feeling well and would be working from home. Morning sickness? I asked with appropriate husbandly concern. Just stress. Everything at work is so chaotic right now. I kissed her forehead and told her to take care of herself and the baby, then left for my own job with the satisfaction of knowing that Phase 3 was proceeding exactly as planned. Khloe's suspension had accomplished two important goals. It had eliminated Natalie's primary accomplice and source of inside information, and it had demonstrated that there were real consequences for getting involved in other people's unethical behavior. More importantly, it had isolated Natalie at exactly the moment when Eric was least able to provide support. According to Dave's reports, Eric was spending most of his time meeting with lawyers and accountants, trying to figure out how to handle the criminal charges that were likely to result from his embezzlement investigation. With Khloe suspended and Eric facing potential prosecution, Natalie was left to manage her fake pregnancy and her crumbling affair without backup or guidance, which meant it was time for Phase 4, the direct confrontation that would force her to choose between maintaining her lies and admitting the truth. And I was going to make sure that neither choice would work out the way she expected. The town's annual Harvest Festival provided the perfect setting for what I privately called the Revelation. Every October, our little community transformed the Central Park into a celebration of autumn that drew families from 3 counties. There would be craft booths, food vendors, live music, and most importantly for my purposes, a large crowd of people who knew both Natalie and me. We should go to the festival this weekend, I suggested to Natalie over breakfast on Thursday. It might be good for you to get out and enjoy yourself, especially with all the stress at work. She looked up from her herbal tea, surprised by my suggestion. We hadn't attended a community event together in over a year. Are you sure? I know these things aren't really your scene. I think it would be nice. We could announce the pregnancy to our friends and neighbors, make it official. The color drained from her face so quickly that I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Don't you think it's still a little early for announcements? I'm only about 6 weeks along. You're right, of course. We should wait until after the first trimester, but we could still go and have fun. When's the last time we did something together as a couple? She agreed, probably because refusing would have seemed suspicious, and I spent the next 2 days preparing for what would either be the climax of my revenge or a spectacular failure. Dave had provided me with a complete dossier on Eric's current situation. His suspension had become a termination, his wife Jennifer had filed for separation after discovering evidence of his affairs, and he was facing potential criminal charges for embezzlement. Most importantly, he was desperate and making increasingly poor decisions. He's been drinking heavily and making threats about the people who destroyed his life, Dave reported. Yesterday he showed up at his former office building and had to be escorted off the property by security. Is he dangerous? Not physically, but he's definitely unstable. The kind of unstable that makes people do stupid things in public. Perfect. I was counting on Eric to do something stupid in public. Saturday morning dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of perfect autumn weather that makes small-town festivals feel like Norman Rockwell paintings. Natalie dressed carefully for the event, choosing an outfit that was flattering but not too tight, maintaining her role as an expectant mother who was being careful about her appearance. We arrived at the festival around noon, when the crowds were thick and the atmosphere was festive. I bought us apple cider and funnel cake, played the role of the attentive husband, and waited for my carefully orchestrated plan to unfold. At 1:30 p.m., I spotted Eric near the beer tent, looking disheveled and agitated. He was wearing sunglasses despite the cloudy weather and had the loose, unfocused movements of someone who'd been drinking since breakfast. "Isn't that Eric from your office?" I asked Natalie, pointing in his direction. She turned to look and immediately tensed. "Oh no, what is he doing here?" "Maybe he's trying to have a normal day despite everything that's happened. Should we go say hello?" "No, I don't think that's a good idea. He's probably here with Jennifer and the kids." But Eric wasn't there with his family. According to Dave, Jennifer had taken the children to her mother's house and filed a restraining order after Eric had shown up drunk at their home earlier in the week. Eric was there alone, drinking beer and watching the crowd with the intensity of a man looking for someone specific. When he spotted Natalie, his face lit up with the kind of desperate relief that comes from seeing a familiar face in a hostile world. He started walking toward us, and I felt Natalie's hand grip my arm. "Alex, I think we should leave." "Why? He's just coming over to say hello. He's been under a lot of stress. I don't think he's thinking clearly. All the more reason to be friendly. The man's going through a difficult time. Eric reached us just as I finished speaking, and the smell of alcohol was so strong that several nearby families moved their children away from our conversation. "Natalie," he said, too loudly for a public gathering. "I've been trying to call you all week." "Hello, Eric," she replied carefully. "I heard about your situation at work. I'm sorry." "My situation?" His laugh was bitter and sharp. "Someone destroyed my life, Natalie. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing." I stepped forward and extended my hand. "Eric, right? I'm Alex, Natalie's husband. We've never been formally introduced." Eric stared at my hand for a moment before shaking it with more force than necessary. "Alex, yes, Natalie's told me a lot about you." "All good things, I hope?" "Oh, yes. She's told me exactly what kind of man you are." The conversation was attracting attention from other festival goers, which was exactly what I'd hoped for. Nothing spreads through a small community faster than public drama, especially when it involves people whose personal lives have been the subject of speculation. "Eric," Natalie said quietly, "maybe we should talk about this later. This isn't the right place." "When, Natalie? When is the right place? You won't return my calls, Khloe's been suspended, and my entire life has fallen apart. When exactly would be a good time to talk?" I watched Natalie's face as she realized that Eric was about to expose their affair in front of half the town. She looked trapped, desperate, and completely unprepared for this level of public scrutiny. "I think you've had too much to drink," she said, trying to keep her voice calm. "Maybe you should go home and get some rest." "Home?" Eric's voice was getting louder. "I don't have a home anymore. My wife kicked me out, my job is gone, and the woman I thought cared about me won't even talk to me." The crowd around us was no longer pretending not to listen. Phones were coming out, and I could see people starting to record the confrontation. In the age of social media, Eric's public breakdown would be documented and shared within hours. "Eric," I said, putting on my most reasonable voice, "I think Natalie's right. You seem upset, and this isn't the right place to work through personal problems." "Personal problems?" He turned to face me directly, swaying slightly. "Do you know what your wife has been doing, Alex? Do you have any idea what kind of marriage you're really in?" This was the moment I'd been orchestrating for weeks. Eric was about to expose Natalie's affair in the most public, humiliating way possible, in front of friends and neighbors who would spread the story throughout our entire community. "I'm not sure what you mean," I said, maintaining my role as the confused, innocent husband. "Your wife is pregnant," Natalie interrupted desperately. "Eric, please don't do this. I'm pregnant, and the stress isn't good for the baby." Eric stopped mid-sentence, staring at her with an expression of complete confusion. "Pregnant?" "Yes. Alex and I are expecting our first child." The lie hung in the air between us, and I watched Eric's alcohol-impaired brain try to process this information. According to his understanding of the situation, he was the one having an affair with Natalie. If she was pregnant, the baby would have to be his. But Natalie was claiming the baby was mine, which meant she was either lying to Eric or lying to me. Given his current state of mind, Eric was in no condition to figure out the implications quietly. "That's impossible," he said, loudly enough for everyone within 20 feet to hear clearly. "The baby can't be his? We've been together for months, and you told me that you and Alex haven't been?" "Eric, stop." Natalie's voice was sharp with panic, but Eric was beyond stopping. The alcohol, the stress, and the public setting had combined to destroy whatever self-control he might have had left. "You told me you were leaving him," he continued, his voice carrying across the festival grounds. "You said the marriage was over, that you were just waiting for the right time. And now you're telling me the baby is his?" The crowd around us had gone completely silent. Even the nearby vendors had stopped their sales pitches to listen to what was unfolding. I looked at Natalie, whose face had gone completely white. Then I looked at Eric, who was swaying on his feet and apparently unaware that he'd just destroyed both of their reputations in front of half the town. "I think," I said quietly, "we need to have a conversation, all of us. But not here." "No," Eric said, shaking his head violently. "I'm tired of secrets and lies and private conversations. I want everyone to know the truth about what's been happening." And then, in front of approximately 200 people with smartphones, Eric Dalton told the complete truth about his affair with my wife, her plans to leave me, her fake pregnancy announcement, and her promise that we would be together once she'd handled the Alex situation. By the time he finished, Natalie was crying. I was standing in stunned silence, or at least appearing to, and the crowd was recording every moment of what would undoubtedly become the most watched video in our town's social media history. The festival continued around us, but our part in it was over. Natalie fled toward the parking lot. Eric stumbled toward the beer tent for another drink, and I stood in the middle of the crowd, playing the role of the devastated husband who just learned that his entire marriage was a lie. Several people approached me with sympathy and offers of support. Mrs. Henderson from down the street patted my shoulder and told me I deserved better. Mike Patterson appeared from somewhere in the crowd and offered to drive me home. But I didn't need comfort or transportation. I needed to get home before Natalie did, because Phase 5, the final phase, was about to begin, and Phase 5 would determine whether my months of planning had been worth the effort. I arrived home 15 minutes before Natalie did, which gave me just enough time to prepare for our final conversation as husband and wife. I'd spent months planning this moment, calculating every variable and preparing for every possible response she might have. When she walked through the front door, her face was streaked with tears and her carefully maintained composure was completely shattered. She looked like a woman who'd just watched her entire life collapse in the most public way possible. "Alex," she began, but I held up my hand to stop her. "Before you say anything," I said, "I want you to know that I've known about Eric for months. I've known about the fake pregnancy, the lies, the planning sessions with Khloe, all of it." She stared at me in shock. "You knew?" "I'm an engineer, Natalie. I notice when things don't add up. A pregnancy after 2 years of no intimacy was mathematically impossible. Everything else was just confirmation." "Then why didn't you say anything?" "Because I wanted to see how far you'd go. I wanted to understand exactly who you'd become and what you were capable of." She sank into a chair, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd seen her in years. "So, everything that happened today, Eric showing up, the confrontation, you planned all of it?" "Not exactly. I created the conditions that made it likely, but Eric's public breakdown was his own choice, just like your affair was your choice and your lies were your choice." "Alex, I can explain." "No," I said firmly. "You can't explain. There's no explanation that makes any of this acceptable. You decided I was stupid enough to believe your pregnancy story, weak enough to let you manipulate me, and pathetic enough to deserve what you were planning to do to me." "That's not true. I never thought you were stupid or weak." "Then why did you think I'd believe that a baby conceived through immaculate conception was mine?" She had no answer for that, because there was no answer that didn't confirm exactly what I'd accused her of. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now you pack your things and leave. The house is in my name, the bank accounts are frozen, and your reputation in this town is finished. Eric's facing criminal charges, Khloe's been fired, and you're unemployed as of Monday morning." "How do you know I'm unemployed?" "Because Mrs. Quinn received an anonymous package this morning containing evidence of your involvement in Eric's expense account fraud and Khloe's confidentiality violations. Your company doesn't tolerate employees who participate in criminal conspiracies." The color drained from her face again. "You destroyed my career." "No, Natalie. You destroyed your career when you decided to help your lover steal from his employer. I just made sure the right people found out about it." She sat in silence for several minutes, and I could see her trying to process the complete destruction of everything she'd worked to build over the past 6 months. "I never meant for things to go this far," she said finally. "Yes, you did. You planned every step of this, from the fake pregnancy to your exit strategy. The only thing you didn't plan for was the possibility that I might be smarter than you gave me credit for." "So this is it? 8 years of marriage, and you're just throwing it all away?" I looked at her sitting in my living room, in the house I'd paid for, surrounded by the life I'd built, asking me why I was throwing our marriage away. "I'm not throwing anything away," I said. "You already did that when you decided Eric Dalton was worth more than the promises you made to me." She started crying again. But they weren't the tears of someone who was sorry for what she'd done. They were the tears of someone who was sorry she'd been caught. "Where am I supposed to go?" "That's not my problem anymore. You're a smart, capable woman who's been planning this transition for months. I'm sure you'll figure something out." "Alex, please. Can't we try to work this out? Can't we go to counseling or—" "No." The word came out harder than I'd intended, but it felt good to say it. "There's no working this out. There's no counseling that fixes what you've done. There's no going back to pretending we have a marriage worth saving." She looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Fear. Not fear of physical harm, but fear of consequences that she couldn't manipulate or charm her way out of. "I'll pack a bag," she said quietly. "You have 1 hour." While she was upstairs gathering her belongings, I called Dave Russo to let him know that his services were no longer needed. "How'd it go?" he asked. "Exactly as planned." Any regrets? I thought about the question seriously. Did I regret the months of planning, the careful manipulation, the systematic destruction of 3 people's lives? No, I said finally. They made their choices. I just made sure those choices had appropriate consequences. What about your wife? You think she learned anything from this? I looked up at the ceiling, where I could hear Natalie moving around our bedroom, packing the remnants of her life into suitcases. I think she learned that actions have consequences, I said. Whether she learned anything else is not my concern anymore. An hour later, Natalie came downstairs carrying 2 suitcases and looking like a woman who'd aged 10 years in a single day. I'll need to come back for the rest of my things, she said. Call first. I don't want any surprises. She nodded, then stood in the doorway for a moment, looking around the house we'd shared for 8 years. Alex, I want you to know that I did love you. Once? I know, I said. But love isn't enough when it's not accompanied by respect, honesty, or loyalty. She left without another word, and I watched from the window as she loaded her suitcases into the car she'd bought with money from the joint account I'd already closed. After she drove away, I sat in my living room and calculated what I'd accomplished over the past 3 months. Eric Dalton was facing criminal charges and had lost his job, his marriage, and his reputation. Khloe Mason had been fired and would likely never work in HR again. Natalie had lost her job, her home, her marriage, and her standing in the community. The cost had been considerable, months of planning, thousands of dollars in investigator fees, and the complete destruction of my marriage. But the alternative, allowing them to continue their conspiracy while I played the role of the oblivious husband, had been unacceptable. I'm an engineer. When I discover a structural flaw, I fix it. When I find a system that's failing, I redesign it. When I encounter a problem that threatens the integrity of something I've built, I eliminate the problem. My marriage had been structurally unsound, compromised by lies and betrayal that made it impossible to repair. The only solution had been controlled demolition, followed by a complete rebuild. As I sat in my house now, legally and practically, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. The uncertainty was over. The lies had been exposed. The people who'd thought they could manipulate and deceive me had learned otherwise. Outside, the sun was setting on what had been a very eventful day. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of rebuilding my life without the weight of a failing marriage and a dishonest wife. I opened a beer, turned on the television, and settled in to enjoy my first evening as a single man in 8 years. It felt like a new beginning.